On the blistering tarmac of an international airport, a man in a military uniform walks alone. No red carpet, no bodyguards. He walks straight toward a white private jet, a machine that appeared like a ghost overnight. To any outsider, he's just another anonymous officer. But they don't know they are witnessing the president of an entire nation about to confront a staggering conspiracy. That plane isn't just a luxury jet. It's a crime waiting to take off, filled with tons of gold stolen from their motherland. This isn't a movie script. This is the raw truth that shook the world. If you have ever felt that a painful truth was being hidden in plain sight, a betrayal that no one dared to speak of, hit that like button and join me as we expose this story. That plane was no ordinary visitor. It had slipped into Burkina Faso's airspace under the cover of darkness, with no warning, no flight plan filed, and certainly no explanation to the local authorities. When air traffic control demanded identification, they received mysterious clearance codes that were somehow valid. The ground crew was ordered to keep their distance. No refueling, no cargo inspection. They said it was just a quick technical stop. A shroud of mystery and power surrounded it. The heat, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, turned the runway into a shimmering sea of thermal waves. And there, on runway 7, the stark white plane sat silent, a phantom of wealth and secrets. Its silence was terrifying, as if it were mocking anyone who dared to question it. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré was not fooled. This man, who had become the president of Burkina Faso, did not rise to his position by ignoring warning signs. He was not some impulsive leader looking for a headline. No, this man was patient, strategic, and deeply methodical. From the presidential palace, he had watched it all unfold, and in his mind, the scattered pieces were clicking together into an alarming picture. For 4 weeks, he had been hearing whispers from across the country, strange stories taking place in the dead of night. Villagers living near old gold mines, places that were supposed to have been abandoned for years, reported seeing convoys of covered trucks moving through their lands after midnight. These convoys were escorted by men who looked foreign, men who did not speak the local languages. Picture this. You're a farmer living near a mine that's long been shuttered, and suddenly at 2 in the morning, you hear the roar of helicopter blades in the darkness, landing near the supposedly empty pits, only to vanish before dawn. Strange, isn't it? When government investigators showed up to check, they came back empty-handed. Nothing to see here, they reported. Just locked gates and empty mine shafts. Meanwhile, journalists who tried to dig deeper into these stories started receiving phone calls. Anonymous voices telling them to drop the investigation. Think of your family, you know the type. Some received messages telling them they were being watched. These classic intimidation tactics made one thing clear. Someone very powerful did not want this story to get out. But Traore, he was watching it all from the presidential palace. He understood that what was happening wasn't just about a precious metal. It was about history repeating itself. In Burkina Faso, gold is not just some shiny metal you pull from the ground. It represents generations of struggle, the sweat of miners, the songs of grandmothers and mothers who still remember what was stolen from their people before. Gold is the soul, the dignity, the very future of this country. So when that mysterious plane landed without explanation, Traore knew exactly what was happening. It was the same old story. Foreign powers quietly stealing Africa's wealth, while local officials either looked the other way or actively helped them do it. But this time, things were going to be different. The next morning, in a routine security meeting held behind closed doors, Traore leaned forward in his chair and asked a simple question that made the entire room fall silent. Has anyone checked the cargo manifest for the plane on runway 7? The way he asked was not dramatic or accusatory. Just calm, steady, and in control. But everyone in that room knew this was no casual inquiry. The air grew thick. The silence stretched for an uncomfortably long time. Finally, one official tried to answer, his voice a mix of nerves and defensiveness. Sir, it is a diplomatic aircraft from a partner nation. Traore didn't raise his voice or become aggressive. He simply asked again, a question that cut deeper than any accusation. Which nation? Another, even more uncomfortable silence. No one could answer because no one really knew. The entire operation had been wrapped in layers of secrecy and fabricated paperwork. They had accepted a lie simply because it came in a diplomatic wrapper. In that moment, the incompetence and perhaps even the complicity in the room was laid bare in the cold light of truth. Traore knew, and now they all knew that he knew. The show was about to begin, and this is where Captain Ibrahim Traoré showed the world what a true leader looks like. He didn't call a press conference, he didn't tweet angry messages, he didn't stage some dramatic confrontation for the cameras. Instead, just after sunrise, a single, unremarkable military truck rolled to the edge of the airport. No flags, no fanfare, nothing flashy. The door opened, and Traoré stepped out in his olive-green fatigues and his signature red beret. He walked calmly across the scorching tarmac, where the temperature was already climbing toward 105 degrees Fahrenheit, heading straight for the mysterious plane. Honestly, if you didn't know who he was, you would have thought he was just another military officer going about his daily duties. But as he approached the plane, a tall, foreign man stepped out to block his path. This guy had all the classic signs: clean-shaven, wearing pitch-black sunglasses even in the bright morning sun, and a rigid posture that screamed, "I am used to giving orders." The man held up a hand like a traffic cop and barked, his accent a sharp American English. "This is a restricted area. You have no authority here." His tone was clipped, disrespectful, as if he were talking to some low-level soldier who had wandered into the wrong place. He didn't ask who Traoré was, nor did he show any sign of recognition. Maybe he didn't know, or maybe he simply didn't care. But Traoré, he didn't flinch. He just kept walking until he was only a few feet away from the man. His silence, his calm, was more intimidating than any threat could ever be. Then he asked that simple question, the one that had haunted the security meeting just an hour before. "Has this plane been searched?" The agent looked flustered and annoyed. He started to say something like, "Sir, do you have any idea who you're talking to?" But he never got to finish that sentence. Why? Because a young Burkinabe officer standing nearby leaned over and whispered something in the man's ear. Watching the man's face change was like watching someone realize they had just insulted their boss's boss's boss. The color drained from his face. His mouth clamped shut, and not even those dark sunglasses could hide the sudden panic in his eyes. He had just realized he was speaking to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, who had shown up in person to handle the situation. Traoré gave him no time to recover or make excuses. Looking him dead in the eye, he repeated his question, this time slower, one word at a time. "Has this plane been searched?" The agent hesitated, cornered, because the real answer was no. The plane had landed without any proper inspection. No customs officials had been allowed near it. No one had opened the cargo bay or checked any documents. Everything had been handled through whispers and backroom deals. Then, Traoré turned to his own officers and gave two simple commands in that same calm, clear, unshakable voice. "Arrest the crew. Open the cargo hold." No shouting, no drama, just commands that were firm and final. And just like that, what started as a moment of disrespect turned into the beginning of a reckoning that would send shockwaves around the world. The soldiers moved swiftly, their actions as precise and coordinated as a deadly symphony. They surrounded the jet, transforming it from a symbol of mysterious power into a sealed crime scene. Every escape route was cut off. The foreign agent now stood frozen, his face pale, closely watched by two large soldiers. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving only the naked truth of his failure. An officer climbed the metal stairs leading to the cargo door. He knocked twice on the door, a signal. Then, without hesitation, he took a large pair of bolt cutters and clamped them down on the seal. A cold snap echoed in the hot air, the sound of a conspiracy being broken. As the door creaked open, revealing the darkness inside, a strange silence fell over everyone. But what they found inside was anything but subtle. Dozens of crates were stacked neatly, all of them wrapped in white plastic and labeled with a red cross and the blue logo of a famous European humanitarian organization. The kind of organization that is supposed to deliver medical supplies and emergency aid to poor countries. Some of the crates even had text on the side, surgical kits and emergency supplies for humanitarian distribution only. It was a cruel and disgusting lie. They were using the very symbol of compassion to cover their bottomless greed. A young officer, holding a sharp knife, sliced a long gash across one of the crates. The plastic and cardboard shell fell away, and the lie collapsed instantly. There were no bandages, no medicine, no emergency food or vaccines. Instead, there were solid gold bars stacked tightly together, wrapped in soft cloth, resting like precious bricks in a fortress. The morning sun hit them, making them gleam with a brilliant, deadly beauty. When one officer reached in with both hands and lifted a single bar out, he actually let out a small groan from the weight of it. This wasn't fake. This was real. Millions, possibly tens of millions of US dollars worth of stolen gold, being smuggled out of Burkina Faso under the cover of humanitarian aid. The young officers stood in stunned silence, unable to believe their eyes. How could something so brazen, so massive, be happening right under everyone's nose? The betrayal was too deep, too blatant. But Traore showed no surprise. He looked at the cargo hold full of gold, and on his face there was no shock, only a deep sadness and an iron resolve. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The evidence confirmed exactly what he had suspected, what he had pieced together from weeks of strange reports and midnight activities. He already knew what they would find. But then, the real shock was yet to come, because Traore wasn't finished. Traore did not celebrate. He did not allow himself a single moment of satisfaction. His eyes moved from the cargo hold filled with gold and shifted up toward the plane's luxurious passenger cabin. To his officers, the mission seemed complete. They had found the undeniable proof. But for Traore, the story was just beginning. He knew that gold does not move by itself. There had to be a mind behind this, an architect of this betrayal. He gave another order, one that surprised his officers: search the cabin. One of his men climbed the metal steps, approaching the tinted door of the passenger area. He reached out, pushed the door slightly ajar, and then he froze. He said nothing for a moment, just stood there as if something inside had knocked the very breath from his lungs. He was motionless, a stunned silhouette in the doorway of truth. Traore, still on the tarmac, looked up, his voice calm, but now edged with concern. "What is it?" The officer turned back slowly, his eyes wide. His voice was almost a disbelieving whisper. "Sir, there's someone inside." Traore didn't hesitate. He climbed those stairs himself. When he stepped into the cabin, it was like entering another world. Cool, conditioned air washed over his face, a stark contrast to the burning heat outside. The interior was lined with imported leather, with crystal glasses and gold-plated fixtures gleaming in the soft light. And there, sitting in the first row, legs crossed, as relaxed as if he were flying first class to a weekend resort, was a man Traore recognized instantly. The man was older, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, holding a glass of fine whiskey. He was swirling the amber liquid as if he didn't have a care in the world. When he looked up and met Traore's eyes, he offered a strained, awkward smile and said, "Captain, I wasn't expecting you here." His voice carried a hint of arrogance, the kind that only comes from years of holding power, making deals in the shadows, and shaking hands with foreign officials. This was no small-time smuggler. This was a former finance minister from a neighboring country, a man famous for his deep connections to Western governments and foreign military bases. He had worked with international investors, helped negotiate mining contracts, and knew exactly how these systems worked. He was the embodiment of the very corrupt system Traore was fighting against. And now, here he was caught red-handed, sitting on a plane full of stolen gold, attempting to smuggle it out of a country that wasn't even his own. Traore stood in the doorway of that luxury cabin, unmoving, just watching him. There was a long, heavy silence. The man in the suit's arrogance began to crack under Traore's steady gaze. Then, without a hint of emotion, without raising his voice, Traore spoke a single word, an order that carried more weight than all the gold in the cargo hold. Out. The man in the suit didn't argue or resist. He knew there was no way out of this. He knew the game was over. He had lost. Two officers stepped into the cabin and told him to stand. He placed his half-finished whiskey on the armrest, straightened his expensive jacket, and rose without another word. As he walked down those stairs, out of the cool air of luxury and into the harsh sunlight of reality, his eyes squinted. He tried to hold his head high, but there was no pride left in his walk. No cameras had been allowed near the runway yet. There were no reporters or flashing lights, only the sound of boots on the hot tarmac and the distant whir of a helicopter. He was escorted directly to an armored vehicle, and when the steel doors of that vehicle slammed shut behind him, the sound echoed like the hammer of justice finally coming down. But while the arrest was happening quietly behind the curtain, elsewhere, all hell was breaking loose. Inside the air-conditioned government buildings of Ouagadougou, the phones began to ring off the hook. Officials, ministers, advisors, everyone started getting calls from their international contacts. Most of the calls came from European embassies, and at first, their tone was soft, calm, and diplomatic. There must be some misunderstanding, one ambassador said, his voice dripping with false reason. We have no record of this flight. Another tried a different approach. This operation involves sensitive international logistics. It would be best not to overreact. But as the hours passed and no satisfactory explanation was given, their tone changed dramatically. Polite became urgent. Urgent became firm. Firm became angry. You need to release the crew immediately. There will be consequences if this is not resolved quietly. You are jeopardizing years of international cooperation. Some hinted at economic sanctions. Others mentioned pending trade deals. A few simply said, handle this quietly or else. The threats were not veiled. They were used to African leaders who would tremble and obey. They expected submission. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré, he said nothing to them. He didn't answer their increasingly frantic calls. He didn't issue a press release or play the diplomatic games they expected. His silence was more powerful than any statement. It was driving them mad. You cannot control a man who refuses to be intimidated. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He announced that a national press conference was scheduled. The announcement went out over national radio and television. Not a secret negotiation, not a backroom deal, a public conversation with his own people. The entire nation held its breath. From the urban coffee shops to the village radios, from university lecture halls to open-air markets. Everyone was waiting to see what their president would say about this unbelievable situation. And in Paris, in Washington, in European capitals, diplomats and spies were watching too, breaking out in a cold sweat. The game had been moved from the shadowy corridors of power to the world stage. And the man in charge was none other than the captain in the red beret. The nation had gathered around its televisions and radios. In the cafes of Ouagadougou, silent crowds gathered, their eyes glued to the screens. In remote villages, people huddled around old, battery-powered radios. In university halls, students paused their debates. Across the entire country, a hushed anticipation fell. Everyone waited to hear what their president would say. And then, when the cameras came on, it was not what anyone expected. There was no grand podium. No national flags waving in the background. No official decorations. No military parade. No teleprompter. Just a single wooden table, an old metal chair, and Captain Traoré, sitting simply in his olive green uniform and his red beret. He looked completely calm, as if he were talking to a friend. In front of him was the same old, worn leather briefcase he always carried, battered from years of use like an old friend. He opened it and began to speak, his voice containing no drama or anger, but a profound clarity, a clarity that cut through every lie. What you are about to see, he began slowly, is not from a movie. It is not from a foreign country. It is not fiction. Then he pulled out several printed photographs and held them up for the camera. One by one, images of the crates, marked with a red cross. Images of the gold bars stacked inside them. Images of the flight log with its missing entries. Images of the license plates of the unregistered trucks. Cold, hard, undeniable proof displayed for the entire world to see. This gold, he said, and he paused to let his words sink in, belongs to the people of Burkina Faso. It was not donated. It was not part of any legal trade deal. It was not humanitarian aid. He continued, his voice hardening. It was stolen, hidden in boxes labeled as medicine, covered by symbols of trust, escorted by individuals with foreign connections and domestic protection. The silence that followed was almost audible. He had spoken the truth that everyone suspected, but no one had dared to say. He didn't name the man they found on the plane. He didn't have to. The entire country already knew. The photos and rumors had already spread through text messages, radio shows, and whispered street conversations. The people had seen what betrayal looked like. By not naming him, Traore elevated the fight above personal revenge. This wasn't about one traitor, but a system of betrayal. Traore gently closed his briefcase, stood up, and looked directly into the camera one last time. His voice was steady. Burkina Faso is not for sale. Not its resources, not its dignity, not its future. Then he walked off screen. He did not wait for applause. Did not take questions from reporters. He didn't need to explain anything more, because justice had already spoken, not through vengeance, but through undeniable truth. And in that moment, all of Burkina Faso erupted. But not in anger, in pure joy. The streets of Ouagadougou came alive. People poured out of their homes. Miners from the rural regions, still covered in dust, sang songs of pride. Elderly women cried tears of happiness. Young men danced in the intersections. Radio stations abandoned their regular programming to play traditional folk songs, interspersed with audio from speech. This wasn't news anymore. This was history happening in real time. This was the soul of a nation being handed back to its people. By the time the sun set on Ouagadougou that evening, the news had traveled far wider than anyone could have expected. That press conference, filmed with simple equipment and basic lighting, reached millions of people in a matter of hours. The footage crossed borders and oceans, spreading across West Africa, running down through Central Africa, then shooting over to Latin America, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Europe. Social media exploded. Clips from the speech were being translated into Spanish, Portuguese, Swahili, Arabic, French, and English. People all over the world watched and rewatched the moment Traoré said, "This gold belongs to the people of Burkina Faso." For many viewers, this was about more than just a precious metal. It was about truth, dignity, and a small nation standing tall and saying no to exploitation. In Paris, the lights stayed on late inside government offices. Emergency meetings were called in high-security buildings near the Foreign Ministry. Men in expensive suits spoke in hushed tones over maps of West Africa spread across conference tables. One young advisor stood up and admitted what no one else wanted to say. He is no longer just a soldier. He is becoming a symbol. No one argued, because they had all seen the footage too. This wasn't just about a plane or a few bars of gold. This was about a new generation that was no longer afraid to stand up for itself. In Washington, the reaction was colder, more calculated. The State Department issued a brief press release with vague diplomatic language. "We continue to support transparency and legal frameworks in West Africa." No mention of Traoré, no mention of the gold, no mention of the man found on the plane. But behind closed doors, American analysts were genuinely worried because the video was going viral in universities, in activist circles, and in African-American communities. Basically, everywhere that young people were hungry for authentic leadership and tired of political excuses, Burkina Faso had become a mirror, reflecting the questions many were afraid to ask. Who really owns Africa's wealth? By midnight, the stolen gold was secure. There was no secret deal, no late-night flight, no backroom negotiation. It was returned to the state treasury and documented live on television. The crates were opened in public. Every single bar counted and recorded. That night, Long after the press conference was over, long after the celebratory crowds had finally gone home, Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his office. No advisors, no reporters, no cameras. Just a peaceful silence. A single lamp glowed on his desk, casting long shadows across the room. Through the tall windows, he could see the lights of Ouagadougou glittering like distant stars. On his desk, next to his worn leather briefcase, sat a single gold bar. He looked down at his hands, his fingers slowly curling into a fist. Then, almost a thought escaping into the night air, he whispered softly, not to anyone, but to the darkness itself. They thought I would be afraid to challenge their operation. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. They thought their official titles and their expensive suits would protect them. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in crystal clear understanding. But gold, he said, has the same weight in any language. It was a fundamental truth. Gold is heavy, whether it is stolen in French or English or Arabic, whether it is labeled as humanitarian aid or mined in secret, whether it sits in foreign vaults or is hidden on a diplomatic plane, its weight never changes. And neither does its value to the people to whom it truly belongs. That night, dignity was restored, not by guns, but by the weight of truth. In the days that followed, many expected Captain Ibrahim Traoré to make dramatic announcements, to publicly name the smuggler, to expose every corrupt official involved, and to point fingers at foreign powers. But he did none of those things. He never spoke the man's name again. He didn't have to, because this message was never about personal revenge or public humiliation. It was about something much deeper, the truth. And real truth, the kind that is undeniable and solid as a rock, doesn't need to scream to be heard. It doesn't need flashing lights or media campaigns. It just needs to stand there and be. And that is exactly what Captain Ibrahim Traoré did. He stood there with his calm, with his quiet strength, with his unshakable will to return a stolen future to his people. And that, my friends, is how a quiet president with a red beret and a briefcase full of evidence changed everything without firing a single shot or raising his voice even once. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions are the silent ones, led by those who understand that truth is the heaviest weapon of all. If this incredible story of quiet courage and leadership has inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that will completely change the way you see the world. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what we have coming next.